Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Engineers podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by someone who's pretty incredible that you're going to learn over the next 30, 45 minutes. Jonathan Shipman, he's a serial founder, investor, and mentor to many businesses. One of the fun facts and why I'm really excited, he's one of the early stage members of Twitch and actually saw them through their acquisition. So for me, this is quite a cool moment. You know, I've used Twitch in the past, but serve a lot of people. So two topics we'll focus on will really be around growing businesses technically and growing businesses from a mindset and culture perspective. There are one or two really good learnings that I think people who are building businesses or people who are building some really great products can learn from this podcast. I think we can learn a shitload. Let's be fair. Jonathan, big thank you for coming on and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to give an intro into you? Pleasure. Do you want to give an intro into you, your background, and who you are?
Yeah, happy to. If I could, also mention I was a key employee as part of the acquisition to Amazon. And that's important. I think we'll get to that a little bit later. But a key employee basically means you're flagged as if you don't come along with the acquisition doesn't happen. And I wasn't the only one, but I was one of a handful. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. And I think that can come back to, as you're building a business, whether you're an original founder or you're a late come founder or just a key employee as part of the overall business, what does that mean? And how do you become that? The short answer is say yes to a lot of things and don't be afraid to dive into things that you don't necessarily know. And I think a lot of that's driven by your passion. And one of the things, before the current company we started, me and my co-founder, Simon Perriman, before I even went and incorporated the company and, paid out of my own pocket to start putting the company together, we sat down to talk about cultural values and make sure we're on the same page. I think a lot of people, especially if you're a first-time founder, you might not realize like you and your co-founder or co-founders, you're forming a marriage. And yes, maybe it's not a romantic marriage, but it's a marriage. It's a relationship. You're going to be spending a lot of time together. In fact, if you have a romantic relationship, you may find you're spending a lot more time with your co-founder or co-founders than your partner. And so I think it's important from day one to set those things out. And one of the important things that we talk about a lot is have passion. Now that can come out in different ways. Different people are very passionate about different things. But if there isn't something that you're highly passionate about, especially when we're talking about working at a startup company or starting your own company, how are you going to get out of bed every morning and be excited to drag your body, which is, tired and exhausted to your computer or to your books or whatever you're going to start your day. And without passion, like you're going to burn out. And that's the last thing we want, right? Is to burn out. So we really want to know, like, what are you passionate about and how does that drive you? So if we go back early into my career as a fledgling tech nerd, I was passionate about the engineering side, just pure engineering side of things. I started my engineering career actually as in computers as a technician at a local computer shop, building computers and installing computers, computer systems, computer networks for local businesses. And then from there, took that experience and got an interview at Hewlett-Packard, Rancho Bernardo, California, and was able to become part of their quality assurance engineering team. And then, for me, it was just like a dream come true to be able to keep like getting a new opportunity that stretched me, let me learn about things. And so my passion at that point in time was really just a curiosity about technology and moving that ball forward. I met a lot of awesome people there. I had the opportunity to jump from that to a startup still in San Diego, California. And that startup failed. But but I learned a ton of that startup. Kept taking opportunities like, hey, what is the guy or the girl above me doing? Like the next level of role. And am I willing, like, if you go to them and say, hey, will you teach me and I'll do the work you don't want to do? Like, I'll pick up the grunt work that you'd prefer not to do. Very rarely are you going to find another nerd, whether it's technical nerd, business development nerd, whatever, someone who's passionate about their role, who doesn't want to share their knowledge, especially when you show the willingness to say, hey, I'm going to do my job and do additional work of your job that you don't want to do just so I can get the opportunity to learn from you. And when that company failed, I at that point in time, I said, you know what, I should be in the Bay Area. That's where, sorry, Bay Area, California, specifically Silicon Valley, or now most people think of it as San Francisco Bay Area. And I packed up, I had a Honda Civic, 2000 Honda Civic. I put my computer in it and a pillow, and I went to the Bay Area. And I was lucky enough to have some friends online. If you're old and a nerd, you probably remember Internet Relay Chat, IRC. I had met a lot of them through early days of bulletin board systems, and then later continued those relationships on IRC. When I got to the Bay Area, I had no place to live, and so they were kind enough to let me, sleep on their floor next to their computers in their office. And then that over time, we actually became good friends, and then later, after I got my feet on the ground, we moved out and rented a house together. But again, it was passion, right? It's scary to move far away. It's scary to try new things. But optionality, I believe, is really important in our lives. And there are many things in life that you don't have control over that are going to potentially tie you down or tie you to a location. There are also a number of things in life you do have control over. And one of those things is how you spend your money, what kind of debt you get into. There's some that is unavoidable, but there's debt that is definitely avoidable. And I always joke, people would ask, oh, now that you're making okay money, why don't you drive a BMW? And I said, because I don't have a car payment on my Civic, right? And then when I could afford something nicer than a BMW, it was like, why don't you drive, this or that fancy thing? And I was like, because that's just more worry, more headache, more money that, would limit my optionality to be able to take risks in life, right? So I went to the Bay Area, went to another startup. It was one of the biggest internet co-location companies in the world. For those who don't know co-location or maybe new to the industry, co-location is where you have a large building run by a company, usually called a data center company or a co-location company, where you rent space and they provide the power, they provide the cooling, the security. And at that time, we also provided the network. We were one of the largest internet backbones in the world. And then the dot-com bust happened, and the company actually went bankrupt, not surprisingly, because a lot of our customers went bankrupt. And at that point in time, I chose to start looking for other opportunities. And this is where I really fell in love with marketplaces. I got the opportunity to interview and landed the job at eBay. And so that was a really exciting time. Took my career now into senior network engineering and then into network and systems architectures while I was there. And really got a lot of opportunity again, to say yes to a lot of things. eBay had bought PayPal, so I got to work with a lot of the PayPal guys. Our team was integrating PayPal, so not only did I get to meet a lot of the PayPal individuals who were working on their infrastructure and systems, I also got a chance to, again, say yes and say, hey, I'll help you with things you need, because we weren't fully integrated. Because I want to learn more about your infrastructure, how it's built, and it's crazy smart guys, obviously. Or people. Apologies, I tend to use the masculine form of words. I am old, but I will try to correct myself. I don't want to suggest that there weren't any women in technology back then. And then even on the eBay side, I would get the opportunity to work on, things that were unsexy, like decommissioning certain older products or technologies. But taking those opportunities showed my coworkers, one, that I was a team player and really working on it, but also showed management and people in other organizations that I was passionate about my job and was willing to work hard, put in the hours, and take on responsibility, even when it wasn't sexy, but it needed to be done. And I believe that combination, combined working with some really smart individuals, both on the PayPal side and eBay side, is when the opportunity came up to go. I was able to join YouTube prior to the Google acquisition, and it was there as part of the Google acquisition. YouTube, I was an infrastructure architect and engineer. My goodness, like talk about like a company that was just growing like crazy. I worked
Yeah.
a lot of smart people, too many to name right now, but my specific team, I think we were on the road 90% of the time. So
Wow.
yeah, if you wanted like, if your life priority was to sleep in your own comfortable bed, like that was not going to be the job, for you. But
Why was that?
why was that? Oh, because we were
Yeah.
growing and expanding so quickly. And so this was like learning how to scale, but also learning how to scale and like being able to make mistakes. So YouTube was growing so quickly, and we actually stored a copy at that time. This was pre Google, of course, and pre Google infrastructure.
Yeah.
We would take a copy of your video when it was uploaded, and we would store it on two separate servers, geographically diverse in the United States. And then that would be then hardware rated, basically a redundancy system locally on that machine. And because we were growing so fast, we were basically always running out of capacity. So we were traveling constantly because we were, my team both owned the network and data architectures, as well as owned the co-location and physical infrastructure architectures. And we didn't have, we're a startup. You have to do everything, right? And this from the, Steve Chen and Chad, CEO, CTO, down to everybody else. It was a flat org. You were either in technology under Steve Chen, or you were not technology under Chad Hurley. And so we were just like, you would get done building one place and you'd realize, oh, crud, Chicago's running out of stuff. And so we'd go over to Chicago and light that up, expand it, pre-build it. So we'd build it so it could be lights out, so stuff could be delivered, and we remotely manage it and bring it all online. But by the time you got done building one, you realized the next one was like already running out of capacity again. And so life was, and because we didn't have like other teams who did like quote unquote grunt work, that was all of us. So we would just travel to the next place to have to set it all up, get it lined up. So we did everything from all the business negotiations to labeling individual cables. Like literally when they say like nothing's beneath you at a startup, it's true. You have to think like that. Now, of course, these days with SaaS infrastructure, for most companies, it doesn't make sense to start with your own infrastructure anymore. For some it does, but for many, for most it does not, I would say, these
Some
days.
incredible, like
Yeah. And then
the eBay experience, YouTube experience.
And that led into,
Take them
obviously, I think, the one that you were talking about. When after about 2 years at Google, or after at YouTube, but Google had purchased us, we were working to integrate our companies together, the infrastructures. There are a lot of funny stories about scale and pain points there when you have two very differently designed infrastructures trying to come together. But again, I wanted to stretch into an area that I didn't have as much experience. And again, that passion of learning. And there was a team called Technical Business Development, and they were a fancy way of saying people who went around the world trying to get stuff for Google for free, negotiate on Google's behalf. And that team, I was really interested in learning more about what they did and how they did it. And same thing, I went to that team and I talked to the manager of that team, a fellow by the name of Maurice Dean at the time, and basically said the same thing. Hey, I want to learn. I want to go with you. I want to increase this skill set. And he said, great. But also there's a bunch of this grunt work we'd like you to do. And I said, okay, deal. Right. And I was still working for YouTube at that time, obviously under the bigger Google umbrella. So again, it was an opportunity to grow my skill set. And by doing that, it gave me the opportunity, when presented with it, to join a little known company at the time called Justin TV. And that's where they needed someone who could come in and understand what's the business side of scaling, as well as the infrastructure side. How do we build this? How do we grow it? How do we make it stable? And how do we make it cheaper? Right. And because I had that skill set that I had been building over time, I was able to take advantage of that, as well as because I lived very personally as frugally as possible. And I had a very at this point, had a very supportive spouse. And we're a bit weird in that me and my partner have always been like planners. So it's like, oh, well, if I want to go take an opportunity at a startup, why don't you go? Like, you should probably be at like a more stable company, right? And vice versa. So I was able to make that jump, obviously interviewed with the founders, the original founders of Justin TV, which were, Michael Seibel, Justin Kahn, Emmett Shear, Kyle Vogt, and then joined the company and then focused on taking a lot of things I wish I had been able to do and knowledge I had learned from both the business side as well as the technical side and apply that at Justin TV as we scaled our infrastructure and wanted to build a moat around our video system and our infrastructure being the best for live video delivery, because that's what we were good at. And then, of course, we got to a point where we could take a breath, lot of stories in there, but and then step back, looked at how this could be a business, like a scalable, sustainable business, and started to focus on video games. And of course, out of that came Twitch. And out of that, as we pivoted the company and we changed around, then I became part of the Twitch founding team. Emmett, as original founder, stayed on as CEO. Kevin Lynn as COO. Jacob Woodsey as head of UI, UX, and design. And a number of other key people as well. And so that's kind of, and then obviously 2011, we launched Twitch officially. 2014, we sold it to Amazon. And then, kind of the rest is history. And I stayed on for another 4.5 years until I got to the point where I was burning out because I was no longer passionate about waking up every morning. And I tended to wake up at 5, be at the office by 6, get home between 9 or 10. And so like my kids half the time they thought I was traveling, even though I was just in the office because I was up and out of the house before they woke up and home after they got to sleep. So it got to the point where I needed to make a change in my life. And that's when I decided to move on from Twitch. So.
And you did that 6 till 9, 10 p.m. grind day.
Oh yeah. And I wasn't the only one. Yeah. And not every day was that, but a lot of days were that. And I commuted about an hour each way as well. So it was a very busy time. And also you're working on the weekends, right? I mean, it's a startup. You got to do what you got to do to keep it up, keep it scaled, right? Respond to user issues, respond to global issues, right? Issues beyond your control, even half the time. But that's part of a startup. And when your startup is, when you find product market fit, you start to grow really quickly. And while your users will forgive you for outages and other things, the goal is not to have them. Yeah.
100%. And I didn't even want to focus on necessarily the time or the hours spent on building a company like that. But Twitch are a phenomenal name in the business. Obviously, an acquisition by Amazon is no small feat. It's incredible. What are 3 key standout takeaways from that experience for you before we move on to growing businesses technically, growing businesses culturally, really some of the meat and bones of the podcast? But talk to me about 3 key takeaways from that experience.
Wow, that's such a long 3 takeaways over almost like a 10-year run. I think one is setting up goals around. I think when you have goals that look like they were in juxtaposition of one another, I mean, how can I do X if Y is almost the opposite? But realizing a lot of time that setting those goals forces innovation. And so for a specific example, one of the because we were live video and obviously video is expensive to deliver, I had the goal of increasing our ability to deliver volume, increasing quality while delivering volume, while decreasing cost. Right. And normally you're like, well, pick one. You can have quality or you can have cheap. And there was no pick one. It was like, you have to do both things. We won't survive unless you do both things. Right. And so having these 2 goals where you're constantly having to make business decisions to balance them, to say, is quality good enough? Can I drive down costs? Where's quality going, and how can I drive it up? And obviously, there's a lot of technical tricks and stuff we did around around the video system and intelligence we built into it. But I would say, when you can realize that you have two goals that are in juxtaposition like that, or competing with each other, but will drive innovation if you have to drive both of them. So I think that was something, probably for the first time in my career, I really thought about it at the, like, from a top down level of the business, and how we were driving it, and how they could work together, and not being like, the young engineer in me be like, you can have one or the other, you can't have both, right? But the more mature business engineer in me was like, we have to drive both, and the only way we're going to drive both is by thinking about this intelligently, thinking about it from a holistic business experience, our business partners, not just our customers, our consumers of Twitch, but who are our business partners all around the world that we were working with, and how do we think about this problem in this bigger manner, and then starting to identify, well, like, what does quality mean? How do we measure it? Where can you have different quality in different places depending on your agreements, your partnerships, the cost of delivery, right? And how can you blend that so you're still achieving your top level business goals while driving these underlying KPIs? But I think that was definitely a big one for me. I think, as a technical leader, another one for me, don't, as much as you can, as your organization grows, as a leader, from small to big, like, you need to keep a pulse on your organization and the people working with you and specifically for you. And this goes from when it was just me on my team to when I had hundreds of engineers and product managers and technical program managers, et cetera, working for me. It was set aside time in order to understand what's happening in the organization. I don't mean, like, yes, of course, you have to understand what are the projects your orgs are trying to deliver, what are the KPIs, what are the business metrics, yes, but also what is happening in the zeitgeist of your organization, from individual teams up to the overall organization. And for two, I think, important reasons. One is that when your team sees that you're dialed in, they may not realize you're dialed in because you don't interact day to day, especially as your organization grows. But when they see that you actually do understand and you have insight into what they're doing day to day as an individual contributor, that means a lot to them because they can see that you care as a leader. And I think, and caring as a leader doesn't mean that you're not still, like, running a business and you have to make hard business decisions, but it means you're paying attention. And you're not just like, that's someone else. Like, I hired someone to deal with that completely, right? Yes, they're dealing with it day to day and driving those programs and managing the engineers or the individuals that are delivering, but you still need to be tied into that. And I think part of it is understanding what they do, the products they're delivering, how they're doing, but also challenge that your org may be having culturally. And then digging into that, and then being able to show, hey, not only did I pay attention, do I understand, but I actually take action and build mechanisms to ensure that we're driving the culture we want to have inside the organization. And I think, I know it's something, I think I had individual managers and mentors who I think did a pretty good job of that coming up. I think I was lucky in that way at a lot of places. But I think when I look back at, like, the bigger organizations, when I was one of, 1,000, 500, 1,000 employees, I never felt like my upper management at that point really understood, like, what is my individual group doing to deliver, right? It was kind of beneath them. And I don't mean that they should be talking to us daily, but I felt like they actually just didn't have insight. And I think, maybe that's my own PTSD, but I thought, but my org, I would get feedback from my organization, either blind feedback, or feedback filtered up through, my directors. And it was how much the organization appreciated the fact that I understood what was going on, both from a day-to-day delivery standpoint, but also from, that zeitgeist or meta standpoint, and that I was taking action to address anything I felt was going sideways before it went too sideways. And so I think that was something that for me was really, looking back, I think I just did it naturally, but looking back, it's something that I think I did well and something hopefully I will continue to do well. Yeah.
Love that. And I think something that you touched on in point one as well. And there's a particular note around this when it comes to innovation, and they are your words. We've spoken about this offline, but it does come from a Bezos principle, and it obviously comes from what you were trying to do at Twitch, and it's that trade off between uh,
Yeah.
cost and it's that trade off between quality, and that frugality mindset creates innovation. I'll give the mic back to you, but it'd be really good to understand what I actually mean and what you actually mean by that, and what
Yeah.
frugality actually is and how you can use it in engineering.
Yeah. I think, the overall frugality principle, especially from Amazon, and we had this already at Justin TV. And I mean, sometimes you're just forced to have it because your bank account doesn't allow you to be anything but scrappy, especially as a startup. But I think Bezos talks a lot about frugality, but it's not. There's a lot of stories about, oh, we have decimated doors and all this stuff. But really, at the end of the day, frugality is a way it's a constraining principle to say, hey, if you have this constraint, it will force you to be creative in other ways and to solve problems in ways that are not just for less money, but that those innovations actually drive technical moat because you have to come up with technical innovations to overcome specific hurdles. Now, is it always a technical innovation? Not necessarily. Uh-oh. There we go. I hit
There you go.
spacebar on accident. Apologies. Um,
No, you're fine.
so, like for an example, like an early Justin TV, this would have been pre Twitch. We were wanting to expand, so we had a data center. We had our own cage and our own infrastructure and our own, servers and routers and switches and blah blah blah. Um, but we wanted to expand, but we really couldn't afford to expand. And so it was like, well, how are we going to do this on a shoestring budget? Because we have a lot of customers that are coming over. So we're looking at a global data map of the world and how actual data is traversing from our customers to us and back. And I'm looking at, okay, how can I improve this and improve that performance while lowering our costs overall? And and I'm a believer in, like, it does really take a village to make something happen. And years of industry connections that I could rely on also help, right? That I had built and grown and nurtured over a long period of time. So I don't want to pretend that it was just me doing this magical thing because, I had to call in favors from people who are willing to bet on me because I had been successful in the past, right? In one way or another when dealing with them and dealing with them honestly and ethically. And so we had a lot of data and customers that were traversing in and out of Miami. And there's a large data center there called Napa of the Americas. It was Terramark, sold later to Verizon. And I had, over the years at eBay and YouTube, had become close with an individual who was high up in management there. And I called them up and said, hey, if I don't know how big this thing's going to get, but if you help me today with free space inside your data center, right, and connectivity into your switching fabric, which is where a switching fabric is where a network can connect to change data with other networks. And oftentimes, instead of having to run one cable to every single other network operator in the world, you run one cable in this big fabric. Everybody does, and then you can exchange traffic there if you agree to. And sometimes that's settlement free where you don't pay. Sometimes it's settlement based where you do pay. And I said, but if we grow, I will grow with you, right? Like, you're doing me a favor, but if we grow, I'm going to grow with you and you're going to get our business. So that's one example of being scrappy, leveraging industry contacts and saying, hey, can you help me out here? And we were able to come to an agreement that was very beneficial to us, gave us a great discount that we wouldn't have gotten at other places and let me start building our presence in Miami. In addition to that, I called up a business acquaintance and said, hey, we're poor, but I need certain kinds of computer and switching and routing hardware for a design. Can you help me out? And he said, yes, because they have a bunch of used equipment. And but some of it showed up maybe not in the most pristine condition. So here I am in this large data center working around the clock because what else is there to do anyway? And I'm literally using a hammer to bang out dents in the side of a large Cisco Catalyst. For those who are network nerds and are older, they may remember the big Cisco Catalyst chassis. So that's an example of like using the connections you have. Think about how can I get this done for the cheapest possible cost? And then, of course, you have to connect those two locations across the world. You know, one's in San Francisco, California at 200 Paul. One's at, Napa of the Americas in Miami. Well, you also need to interchange traffic. And again, I could go out and spend, well, I couldn't because we didn't have the money, but you could go out and spend lots of money for different solutions that would be, but I said, look, what is the quality level we need to get to and what are we willing to put up with? And if we're willing to bring our quality down, how much can we save or what will that be? And so I won't name any companies, but let's just say, choices were made that allowed us to leverage someone whose quality wasn't known to be the best, but we came up with traffic engineering tricks to be able to make up for that, right? And that's an example of frugality in kind of a number of different ways in order to say, how can we do this in a way that's sustainable for the company when we really don't have much money, right? And always kind of taking that same mindset and approach to, even as your budgets get bigger and you can afford stuff that doesn't have dents in it, like you still want to have that mindset that frugality is driving your ability to think creatively.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? That point is so prevalent now over the last 12 months where the market's been a little bit rocky. And I've even seen it firsthand myself, where companies can be a lot more frugal about what they do, where they spend their money. I know you love simplicity. We're going to talk about complex systems being built from simple systems in the next couple of moments. It's going to segue into that. But I do want to ask, did you get a chance to work closely with Bezos? And if so, what did that experience look like?
I think I'd be lying if I said I got to work closely with Bezos. I got to work with Bezos in the fact that we had to present to Bezos once a year as part of our operational planning. And part of that is presenting our not just the business plan, but like the product plans within that. And then Bezos and all of his senior vice presidents sit around a table and like judge you, basically. Yeah. I don't mean like hold up 0 to 10 signs, but they're thinking like, but if you come prepared. So there's a lot of stories about Bezos being like angry or a jerk. And personally, I never experienced anything but respect from Bezos. Whether Bezos remembers me, I don't know, because we only met once a year. But he was very good at challenging us to how do you think bigger? How can this integrate into other plans that he had for Amazon and AWS as a whole? And that was always, of course, appreciated. But you always want to come prepared to those meetings. And so really funny, one of the other early Justin TV guys who was part of the pivot to Twitch, an individual named Chris, I won't say his last name in case he doesn't want to be famous on your podcast, but we were up in Seattle to go to one of these meetings to present. And of course, we reported at the time to Andy Jassy, who is now CEO of Amazon, but at the time ran AWS, still obviously a very important large business unit to be running. But we reported up through Andy Jassy. And so we would meet with Andy Jassy once a month to do monthly business reviews. We would present our plans to him first, and then we would go up to Seattle to present to Bezos. And of course, Emmett, as CEO, met with Andy Jassy on a much more regular basis. But we were up there and we were going to present, and Chris loves to tell this story because I'm such a big Bezos fanboy. I don't pretend to hide it. I think as someone who's an operator, like not only his ability to operate and growth hack, um, is genius, but I don't think I've met anybody who can hold so many ideas at once in their head and just kind of like flip through them, compare them, contrast them, see how they work together. He really is a very intelligent human being. And so so we're up there to present, and we know we're going to this meeting. And Chris loves to tell a story because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We get to present to the SVPs. They're gonna try to tear us a new one. I've heard but you come out of the other side with new ideas. Maybe you have to go rework your plan some. And then he was like, he loves to tell, he's like, yeah, and Bezos will be there. And then he loves to tell a story because according to him, I'm not sure if his memory's correct or mine, but he claims I didn't realize Bezos was going to be there, and then freaked out like a true fanboy and like running around and like super excited, squealing. But yeah, so so in that's the way we got to present, interact with Bezos.
Love.
And then we interacted a lot with an individual called Mike Frazzini, who is no longer at Amazon now, but was the head of Amazon Game Studios. He was a big champion of the acquisition of Twitch as part of a greater Amazon Games strategy.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
So lots of crazy, fun, stressful, long days.
What was that experience like, being involved in an acquisition of that magnitude?
Yeah, it was fascinating. So Frank Quattrone, excuse me if I butcher his last name a little bit, of Catalyst Partners, is the investment banking group that helped end up brokering the deal. God, there's so many craziness. And excuse me if I tear up a little bit, because during the same time I actually remember I was standing out front, and I got a call and said, "Hey," from Emmett Shear, the CEO, and said, "Hey, we think we're gonna work on selling the company, because we could look at raising like another round, or we could look at exiting." And the reason it was such like a crazy time for me is my youngest son was undergoing treatment for cancer. So for me, it was this whirlwind time of super excitement around, because people were excited to talk to us, and we were courted by a number of names, big tech names in the industry. And at the same time, I'm dealing with like being in the hospital all the time, and thank goodness for my partner, my wife, and our families, and the support we had, because I don't know how I could have done it otherwise. And he's okay. He made it through his 3 years of treatment, but he made it through, and he's doing great now. So it was a whirlwind time. But going to a CEO of a company worth many, many billions of dollars, and I'm not talking about Amazon, but there were other people in the run. Like there were a number of people who were interested in Twitch, and eating, sitting down at their house to eat dinner while you discuss their vision of what you could be inside their business. It's almost surreal, because on the one hand, you're like, oh my God, you run this giant company. And on the other hand, you're like, I'm in your house and you're also a human. This is so weird, right? You're supposed to be like a news article that I read on my phone. So, but also realizing that, I don't want to say never meet your heroes, so I don't want to imply that they were particularly heroes, but you realize they're human and they're fallible, and the way they think might not align with you. And a lot of people, I think, were very surprised by the Amazon deal with Twitch. And what I would say is, we met with a number of suitors, and what became clear to us in a lot of these meetings were like, they did not, the vision that we had for what we wanted to be and where we wanted to take Twitch and what we saw ourselves as. And when I say we, I don't just mean we, the company, but we, the product and the community, because that's really important. Community made Twitch, right? We would talk to them. We're like, you don't get it. Like, you really don't understand what we've built, why it works, why the community cares. And it was really fascinating to sometimes meet some of these people who were excited, but then you're almost like, but I don't even understand why you're excited, because your vision like would destroy what we've built, right? Because it's so like foreign, kind of what they. And I think just live video in many ways was exciting. Obviously, we were exciting because we had grown so quickly in the
Yeah.
space and become a very well recognized brand. But when we met with the Amazon folks specifically, like they got it, they understood. Like, you can look back, hindsight's 2020, and you can look back and say Amazon Games, their great vision didn't pan out the way they thought it would in the long run. Like they didn't have all these AAA titles. They didn't become the number one place to develop
Yeah.
games. But at the same time, their vision around what they wanted to do and how that could be beneficial for the gaming industry made a lot of sense to us. And because they understood, because they were trying to truly build a gaming ecosystem, they also understood the value and power of Twitch, and weren't gonna come in and try to meddle with the product directly. Now, of course, you can talk about corporate stuff because that's different, internal. But we were very much left alone to run our. I mean, other than having to present a plan that made sense, we were then left to like do our own hiring, build our own teams, drive our product, and move Twitch
Yeah.
forward as a vision. And I think that made a lot of sense for them and for us. And so that's why we ended up, the marriage to Amazon made a lot of sense in the end.
Love that. Some really interesting
Oh.
learnings, some really interesting stories, some really interesting learnings. Talk to us about that mindset of complex systems are made up by simple systems, because I think in quite a lot of ways we've spoken about this in some roundabout ways, and throughout your career, I think you've done that. So, talk to us a little bit about what that phrase actually means and how you might be able to uphold that value in a business, and why it's important as well, right?
Yeah, I think, whether, and this might be like, I call myself a recovering engineer these days, but this might be that part of me. But I really think in terms of building blocks. And when you're solving a big picture issue, whether it's a business plan or a technical solve, like Amazon often talks about working backwards, but I think a lot of engineers do this naturally. Maybe not in every instance of life, but you look at a big problem and you say, how can I break this down into the constituent components of that problem? And for me, I think that, systems are the same way, right? I'm trying to solve X, but let me take one step back from that and break it down into the components I need. Then let me take another step back and break it down into the components I need. And then you start to, and then you have to, for me, and one of the things I was really excited about when I first joined Justin TV was I was going to be able to attack this in a new, different way. At the time, there was a lot of talk about like software defined networks, not socially defined networks. Those are different. Software defined networking. And a lot of this to me came across as really just like, here's this computer brain that control your network, but it was still just basically the same old control plane, data plane. And so I said, you know what, I really want to focus on what I call application defined networking. And I said, the reason I called that is because our core video application was going to really have all the intelligence. But in order for it to be intelligent, it has to be aware of what was going on around it. And I said, the reason we want to do this is because we want the underlying hardware, we want it to be as agnostic as possible so we can move quickly, rip stuff out, upgrade stuff, switch vendors, again, optionality. I want to have optionality. The best way to have optionality is not tie ourselves to one specific vendor. If I'm mad at vendor X, I can, because they're not giving me a good deal or their software quality's gone, downhill, I can move quickly to replace them. And as long as I can feed certain intelligence back up, the application doesn't care what's under it because it can be agnostic of that. So we talk about like a complex system. You think of Twitch's video system today, and a lot of kudos to the team after I left. They really, the director of video, Martin Hess, really had this vision of, I want this to be this separate, the video system actually be separate from Twitch, where anybody can use it. And of course, then that became an AWS service now known as the Interactive Video System, or IVS. And there's some other video live video sites, now using that system, but it's not through Twitch, it's independent, right? But that's a long road. That was like a 12-year road to get to that point. So where we started
Yeah.
was very basic and was just like, okay, at the most basic level, what do we want to do? I want to be able to tell the video application, hey, for this customer, the cheapest place to serve them is out of X, right? And then so what we were able to do is say, hey, for this customer, serve them out of X, right? And what that allowed us to do, and then we could tweak metrics on the underlying hardware layers that would feed those metrics up in the application. The application can then make a decision based on that. And this was, for me, this is value engineering. We were very much worried about cost. It also let us do things at the time because we had video volume to say, hey, I want to negotiate with, network Z, let's say. Network Z isn't listening to me. Well, I happen to know if I send network Z's, traffic out of network double alpha, they pay network double alpha. So if I can just say, hey, applications, just change a metric on the underlying, the video app didn't have to care why. It just had to know, oh, that metric means I should go over here. I should prioritize this path. And now suddenly network Z is very motivated to want to talk to you because you just blew their costs out of the water, right? And these are some of the, it's a combination of business intelligence and technical intelligence to make that happen. So that was one of the first things we really started building into, where the video system application could have this awareness of what was happening underneath, but then the video system can make the decisions. The underneath part doesn't have to be as involved in decision making. Not to say that it didn't make any decisions, but most of them were at the video application level instead of the underlying hardware level.
I think the two things that stand out for me, and it feels as if you've done this for a long time, knowingly it feels like as well, value engineering. I think that has been a little bit lost, or it feels like that in the past 5-10 years, talking and being in the market. So value engineering, I think that's very important and a really good takeaway for people. But I also like your phrase optionality, and my cogs were turning. I can imagine as a startup, optionality, it works, it's easy, but you talk about Martin Hess and his vision and the transition to the Amazon service IVS, and optionality at such a large scale must be challenging, I imagine.
Definitely at a large scale becomes very challenging because every decision as you grow, you're making oh, I did this thing. I did this value engineering bit, but did that hurt quality bit somewhere? Oh, now I need this quality intelligence to be fed into the system, right? And that was in the beginning, it was just hey, we need to know, we have users coming from all over the globe. We need to know exactly where they're entering our network, and our network edge kept getting more complicated, bigger, and vast. And so we could feed in a new metric. We would track every user's request, where it came in, but that would get fed up into the video system. And now we could start to make decisions on quality as well as cost. But as this grew, the video systems, like I said, it's building blocks. So later it's oh, the video system knows exactly which server it can assign you to, know exactly how many interfaces on that server, how busy each interface is, how busy the switch fabric is, how busy the routed links are out of that data. So you keep layering and layering and layering and layering, but at the same time, that data has to be coming in real time. So we had to build these intermediate systems that could gather the data fast enough and feed it to the video application to make decisions, right? And so now, instead of the underlying infrastructure sending it directly to the video app, it's sending it to an intermediary who can process it in real time and send it to the video app, right? And so you keep running into, it's basically like a battle of bottlenecks over and over again, right? And then saying, oh, what's the next thing? If the video system understood it, it could make a more intelligent decision, whether that decision is around quality engineering or cost engineering, which they go hand in hand, really, at the end of the day. And then you get 12 years of that, and you end up hiring some really, really intelligent, much smarter than me engineers, because that's the goal of a good boss, is keep hiring people smarter than you, to keep pushing the boundaries, keep pushing the edge of what is possible and what is capable.
Yeah. Who needs to do that assessment of value engineering, cost engineering? How frequent? What does that process look like? I'm just trying to imagine myself internally in a team looking at my systems, because you've worked on some large scale
Yeah.
systems. You've got a shitload of knowledge that you can help people on.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like, who has the responsibility for that system or that business unit, right? And I really don't believe in the idea of accountability without responsibility, or responsibility without accountability. You have to have both. If you're accountable, you're responsible. If you're responsible, you're accountable, right? The old joke that, like, crap rolls downhill. Like, I think great management, like, you have to hold people to task. People have KPIs, they have milestones, they have goals. But as far as like your organization, you should be a crap umbrella more than you are a crap shoveler, right? Like, you should be protecting your org. And I don't mean in the sense of like, my org is not good and I still protect them. But at the end of the day, if you make a decision to move forward and it turned out to be the not most optimal decision, you as leadership need to own up to that, right? You don't just
Yeah.
find someone in your org to blame it on. But when you're looking at a large scale system like that, you really need to be able to pull in your leaders, because you're not going to scale a system like that without also scaling an organization who can build it and support it, and bringing in your key players from each technological component. And then saying, here's the decision matrix I'm trying to make and what I'm trying to plan for. And then relying on the experts in your organization to give you the advice, but you as the leader are still collating that all together and then making a decision based on that coming in. And as your organization grows, it won't just be your org. You might be relying on a business analyst out of the finance org in order to give you a more accurate breakdown of the financial structure. Because these things can get very complicated very quickly. And when you're trying to make a decision on like, hey, should we or should we not expand the business into country, whatever, country B, like, there's a lot of things to think about there. Like, how do we make money in country B? Do we make money in country B? If we're gonna make the assumption that we will make money in country B, are we making the right assumption about how that money will come in? If you're talking about advertising, are you talking about custom sale activations, which have high CPMs? You're talking about programmatic, which may have low CPMs. The cost of headcount, the cost of legal, like, all of these things start to become part of your decision-making process. And I don't think any one person, like, you're going to have good people to rely on to be able to bring those answers to you, right? And I think that's an important part about scaling talent and culture together.
Yeah. The business context to make the right decisions on some of the trade-offs. Business context is really important. I hear that time and time and time again. You prove it time and time again, like when we're just talking about how large scale Twitch was. I do want to touch on the journey of losing and the winner's fallacy, if you like. Talk to me a little bit about the journey of losing and what that means to you, because we've spoken about that offline, and I think listening to a little bit about your background and how some startups that haven't worked out, they've shaped you, and you've gone through a whole load of experiences, some here, some here. Talk to me about journey of losing.
Yeah.
That mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, winner's fallacy. I mean, when you win, I do think, the old saying, like, luck is when preparation meets timing, right? I do think when you have a win, however you define that, like, there is some luck to that. You can't control the global markets. You don't control if they're going up or down. You don't necessarily control whether it's like you're in acquisition drought or acquisition flood, right? Like, or feast or famine, whatever you want to use there. But you have to be ready to take advantage of it when it presents itself. And I think that's where preparedness and hard work come into play. But even the hardest working, most prepared people can suffer from a drought. We see most recently And we could talk a bit about frugality, not frugality, and hindsight being 2020. But there were a lot of companies who were living in the ZERP era, the zero interest rate era, who, when interest rates started to rise, were suddenly, they just thought money will be there tomorrow because investors will always give me more money. And they suddenly realized, oh no, investors aren't going to give me more money. And they want to see unit economic metrics, not just like interesting ideas or pure growth, but I'll lose money forever metrics. So I think my point being is that there were some really smart people doing some really interesting stuff. But unfortunately, like, if you're going to look at luck, like they ran into a drought and that potentially bankrupted them or brought their company down. In some cases, you can look back and say, could I have spent my money more wisely? Could I have been more frugal? But I also want, people to be clear, like timing can be good and timing can be bad, right? And we want to be able to take advantage, want to hedge as much as we can against the bad times and take advantage as much as we can of the good times. Or if you're a poker player, right? Minimize your losses, maximize your gains, right? I enjoy poker, so maybe some people will like that reference, but that's kind of how I think about it. But yes, I personally, like, obviously could not control whether or not Amazon was going to be doing a bunch of acquisitions, right? That was like a macroeconomic thing that was happening, combined with whatever Jeff Bezos and his SVP team were looking to accomplish as a company. But we were prepared to take advantage of the opportunity when it presented itself. And so that's kind of how I look at some of that stuff. So then when we talk about losing, number of reasons you can lose, and there's so much to learn, wow. Oh, where do I begin? I'm just trying to think, there's minor losses like, ooh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, for example, let's be like my first day at eBay. I'm going to eBay's core data center where all their core databases at the time and everything, all the core databases were in a single facility in the Bay Area in California. And one of the senior architects said, hey, why don't you come with me to the data center? It's my first day. We're going to make some changes. You might as well come check out the infrastructure. I'll show you all around, like get you understanding what's happening with all the different systems, et cetera, et cetera. And we're there, and he's like, okay, we're going to do a maintenance. Obviously we inform other teams, hey, we're doing a maintenance, and he begins the maintenance, and 30 seconds into the maintenance, I just hear him go, oh, fuck me. And we took all of eBay globally down. So eBay was offline completely on my first day. And, that is a failure, right? That was not supposed to happen. It was preventable. But, like any engineer, like you have a reason for outage process. Like, how do you learn from that? How do you prevent that from happening again? How do I personally learn? Like, what led to it? What technologies were involved? Do I need to learn more about those technologies? Do I already know about them? What is the, often joked as like layer 8 of the, OSI model is corporate bureaucracy, but like, what are the people that are involved and who should I know and how do I deal with this and how do we, prevent it in the future? What documentation needs to happen? I think any engineer who's been in operations knows, a reason for outage kind of process and root cause analysis process. But that's one example of failure and learning from it so you don't do it again. I think other failures, other things I learned, I was at the startup in San Diego that failed. That was something I learned about, like, leadership's important and how much a change in leadership. The CEO at the company had a heart attack. He did not die, but he had to go on. His choices were retire because you can't be under this amount of stress, or be on this medication, which made him feel like he was high all the time. And he didn't feel like he could operate that way. So he chose to step down and basically retire. Well, then a PE firm brought in new management. They wanted to change the business. I mean, it just completely changed everything about the company. And so from there, like, what did I learn from that failure? Because in my eyes, it was a failure because the vision that we set out to accomplish, the rug got pulled out from under us for those who were there and passionate about what was happening. And so it's like leadership matters, right? And so that's like, and maybe that's obvious, but when it's like your first or second job and you're still a junior engineer or junior or associate level, whatever, like those things maybe aren't as obvious to you at that time. But now you start to look out for, oh, leadership matters, management matters, who I'm going to like. The group dynamics really important. And if I can afford to be choosy, I should be choosy. Um, and then even like working at Exodus Communications and having that company failure and just looking at the .com failure at that time and saying like, what happened? Like, why did this house of cards come crashing down? Who survived? Who didn't? Right? And getting a better, taking that opportunity instead of being woe is me, like, oh no, taking that opportunity to be able to learn more about what does a sustainable business look like? Why did the business I was at, which looked to be this global powerhouse, fail? And like, what should I be looking for in my next opportunity if I want a company that's more sustainable, right? Big doesn't always mean sustainable. So it's another example of something that failed, but where you can learn something from it. But even though that company failed, I still grew my career into that company, went from a mid-level engineer to a senior level engineer. So, you can still, even inside a situation where a company fails, you can still be growing your career. In that particular job, there was, at times there was a lot of downtime, as in like, you weren't always rushing. You didn't always have a project that was driving you. And, a lot of people just goofed off during that time. I took the time to pick up the next, book. I mean, back then, there's still a lot of books and manuals you could read. Now it'd be PDF, or ask your LLM of choice to educate you, exactly, assuming it doesn't hallucinate and tell you a bunch of lies. But yeah, it's, taking that opportunity to say, hey, this is time to educate myself and grow my technical knowledge again, so I'm prepared when I get the opportunity. And the next opportunity came was an interview at eBay, right? And partially that came because eBay was one of our customers at Exodus, who I had to support occasionally. And so some of the engineers, like literally one time, one guy said, oh, I'm glad I got someone who's not brain dead. Now I could have taken that as an insult, or I could have taken that as, hey, like I am excelling beyond, the team that I'm on, or the larger team that support these guys. And, I realized, they don't necessarily, even though they pay us and like we're a support team for them, they don't respect everybody on the support team that supports them, right? And why is that? And understanding that a lot of the people they didn't respect had, right or wrong, like hopefully they never treated them like less than human. I always felt treated okay, but the because there was a commonality that those people weren't taking an opportunity in their downtime to be able to like continue its education, right? That curiosity and that passion that you have to have. But that opened up the possibility. When my name came up at eBay as a possibility, I was able to get an interview and obviously passed the interview and was hired.
Good lesson.
Yeah.
That's a really good lesson. Okay. There's a couple of really good lessons there. Before we wrap up, serial entrepreneur, mentor, investing, wealth of knowledge. Like we've uncovered that over the last hour. Tell us what Jonathan's up to now.
Oh, lots of stuff. So I do a lot of investing and advising. I really love, I say it keeps me young, but I think it also grows more gray hairs. But I do enjoy investing and advising in early stage companies, generally in the angel and seed phases, where I feel like the founders can use someone who's more hands-on, can help them avoid the pitfalls and landmines that, I've stepped on before in part of my career. Whether it's cost of lawyers to incorporate and run your company and how to bring that down, whether it's scaling systems, think about technical debt. What does technical debt mean? When does it start? Hint, it starts the minute you started thinking about technical debt. But like, that doesn't mean your choices are bad, right? Choices are only good and bad in context of the situation and what you're trying to accomplish, at least most choices without, silly extremes. So I do a lot of that. I really like that. Working on some other stuff to expand my ability to invest and have greater impact. I can't go really into more detail at the moment on what that means, but we'll see if it pans out or not over the next next year or so. And then most recently, with a former coworker at Twitch, we've started a new angeled company called Roll for Gravity, and we're really focused on tools for game masters and players of tabletop role-playing games. It's really a passion project of ours, but we also believe there's an opportunity to really, using modern technical techniques, building on top of specifically designed AI engines, of keeping the essence and the social interaction and infinitely bespoke entertainment of tabletop role-playing games, but bring down the barrier to entry for players and game masters alike, and to grow that market more aggressively and really bring that marketplace UGC aspect into it as well. And our vision is, we want to see a role player in every household. And we know that that's basically an evergreen vision. And then we have, a strategy around how we're going to leverage some of these new technologies. But it's not just saying, hey, let's plug into an existing system. There's a lot of fine tuning and customization that has to happen in order to achieve the vision that we're aiming for. But without going into more specifics, that's kind of what we're up to.
And you're missing frugality as well. A whole lot of frugality.
Speaking of frugality, I was personally packaging and mailing out dice that we did as a giveaway. Today, I was at the post office mailing stuff to people who I ran the social media integration. I reached out to everybody with entries. I did the calculation, the randomization and calculation of who won, collecting addresses, literally packaging it up myself and putting it in the post office, because that's the cheapest way to get it done and grow the company at this point. Now, obviously, as you grow the company, you'll start to weigh the cost benefit analysis of you doing that versus how your time is better well spent. But that's a constant analysis you'll be doing as your company grows over time. And what's the best use of capital right now, while still trying to remain frugal. Doesn't always mean the cheapest possible. It means the most cost beneficial outcome, hopefully. Yeah.
I love that in true Jonathan fashion. Listen, you've been a delight. Your energy, passion, the brain of yours, coming to share some stories. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch in a year.
Excellent. Well,
without a shadow of a doubt, we'll be in touch to see what you're up to on the investment and mentoring side. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast. And I think one of the things to remind that I always think about, but remind people is there's always smarter people in the room than you. Be humble enough to listen to them and, take the advice when it's warranted.
Yeah, spot on. And for everyone liking, sharing, listening, going to look at Jonathan on LinkedIn, checking out Roll for Gravity and Simon as well, who've had on the podcast. All the links are below.
Join our Discord,
Jonathan again,
and come yell at us. That's what we're there for.
And a big thanks from Engineers.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no_. We've also got a website, which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.